Hello humans, I'm Yoshiller, and Pokemon Sword and Shield are finally here! And of course, with the release of a new generation of Pokemon games comes a new generation of the Pokemon anime. In today's day and age, it's a fun time whenever a new Pokemon anime series debuts. One story ends and another one begins. But for today's video, I wanted to take a look back at a time when the Pokemon Company attempted to tell a story and fans didn't really enjoy it. This was the case with Pokemon the series Black and White, or Pokemon Best Wishes in Japan. Most fans of the Pokemon anime will tell you that this portion of the anime would be the worst portion of the entire series. And yet, I have to ask, why? Well, okay, I've heard why, I just don't think I necessarily agree. When Pokemon Best Wishes first aired, there was no doubt that it was certainly different than what the Pokemon anime had done in the past. And sure, when you change something in a long-running series, especially when it's something as massively successful as Pokemon, then naturally you're gonna have people that disagree with the changes. But people hated Pokemon Best Wishes. But in my personal opinion, I don't think it was that bad. And for today's video, I'm gonna go ahead and explain why I personally believe that Pokemon Best Wishes is actually a decent portion of the Pokemon anime's history. And before you think I'm trying to suck up to the Pokemon Company or that I'm some sort of Pokemon social warrior, let me be clear. There are things that I don't enjoy about Best Wishes either. Trust me. It's far from perfect. There are some things that I can't defend, and I'll go over what I disliked about this section of Pokemon history toward the end of this video. But before I even begin discussing anything about Best Wishes, let's make sure that we're all on the same page. So I trust that if you're watching this video, then you've watched at least an episode of the Pokemon anime. I don't feel that it's necessary to provide a complete summary of the subject matter. We all know the general gist, right? The main character's named Ash, travels across the world with his main Pokemon Pikachu, and along the way he comes across various people that he becomes friends with as he attempts to earn 8 gym badges to qualify for a big tournament known as the Pokemon League. That much we all know. And then there are sometimes villainous groups, and then he catches a bunch of different Pokemon, and occasionally he'll be upstaged by some sort of rival. And generally speaking, each series of the Pokemon anime is loosely based on the Pokemon games that are released around the same time. Of course, the Pokemon anime is no stranger to deviating from the story that the games provide, but the games generally serve as a foundation as to what events will occur within the television show. So it only makes sense that before we discuss Pokemon Best Wishes, we should discuss the Pokemon anime series that aired just before it, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. Now, many kids grew up with Pokemon, but many of the kids that did so started to grow out of Pokemon by the time Diamond and Pearl started airing. Don't get me wrong, the games and the show were still massively popular, but it was starting to become evident to everyone that some things were starting to get a bit stale. Everyone was kind of used to the whole Pokemon shtick at this point. In the games, it was pretty clear that there'd be some new Pokemon, some cool, some cute, and some forgettable, and then you'd go around and beat 8 gym leaders, and maybe you'd beat some evil team, and then you'd become the Pokemon League champion. And then, much like the games, the show was becoming a bit formulaic too. When you've already aired more than 400 episodes of a show, I understand that it can be hard to come up with some new ideas. But even still, most episodes went by this basic format. Ash and his friends maybe would come across a new Pokemon, Team Rocket or some sort of antagonist would show up, Ash would fight these characters, Ash would win, and then Ash would continue on with his journey. And sometimes there'd be a little extra event that'd occur along the way. Maybe one of Ash's Pokemon would learn a new move, or if you were lucky, maybe you got to see one of Ash's Pokemon actually evolve. Every once in a while, there'd be a major plot-relevant episode like Ash competing in a tournament or Ash fighting for a gym badge, but otherwise, this was generally the format. But when this was the basic plot of almost every episode of the show from week to week, it's hard to say that this form of entertainment was entertaining. So eventually, Pokemon Black and White were announced, and these games wanted to mix up everything. While the overall goal for a player would still be to earn 8 gym badges, defeat an evil group, and become the Pokemon League champion, various other components of the game were changed to make things more fresh for everybody. For instance, every Pokemon that could be obtained during the main portion of the game would be brand new. So if you wanted a Pikachu, sorry, you would not be catching one during your main playthrough. This meant that fans of the game, whether they be veterans or newcomers, would all be placed on the same playing field. And as a result, this would mean that many new fans could easily start playing the game without any prior knowledge of the Pokemon franchise. After all, the Pokemon in this game would be brand new to everyone. It was the perfect mix-up for the franchise at this point. And as such, the anime that coincided with it, Pokemon Best Wishes, decided to follow suit with a similar format. Much like how the games would put everybody on the same playing field by making it so that you didn't need any prior knowledge to understand what was going on, the Best Wishes anime would air in a similar format. In other words, the anime would be easy for new viewers to watch. Viewers wouldn't need to know the events of the Diamond and Pearl series to understand the Best Wishes series. This was a time that would act as a fresh restart for both the Pokemon games and the animated television show. Technically speaking, it was never easier to become a Pokemon fan. There would still be a bit of continuity between the Pokemon anime in the sense that the main character would still be Ash, his main Pokemon would still be Pikachu, and the Team Rocket characters would still show up. But other than that, you didn't really need to know anything. You don't need to know that Ash caught 30 Tauros, you don't need to know that he got top 8 at the Hoenn League, and you don't need to know that he had a Bailey that took out an entire team of a gym leader. Nah, all you need to know is that this character had a Pikachu and he was going to start collecting some gym badges. Now, to be upfront, conceptually, I really like this. Some shows run on for hundreds and hundreds of episodes, and honestly, it's a bit difficult to be interested in a show when I know that if I want to see how the story concludes, then I need to devote hundreds and hundreds of hours of my time to watch the whole thing. But now fans can just start here. And the dialogue and phrasing of certain sentences in each episode was very careful with which word should be used and which action should be caused. This way you wouldn't upset any fans who did care about continuity, and this way things would still make sense for newer fans. After all, this was still the same Ash character that's been around for over a decade, but things still had to make sense for somebody who's never seen the show before. So this led to some controversy in the sense that Ash had to be dumbed down so he can make some dumb mistakes so that the audience could better understand what the basic mechanics of Pokemon are. Ash had to relearn how to catch a Pokemon, which in basic continuity doesn't really make sense because he's caught so many. But I mean, even in the previous series, he would forget some basic stuff anyway, just so that the plot could reiterate some certain points. So him relearning how to catch a Pokemon or him relearning how to battle properly is nothing too offensive. Every series basically does this in some format. But there are other things that the writers did that make sense from a continuity standpoint and are still fresh to everybody that watches the show. For example, there's an episode where Meowth, the iconic Pokemon of the villainous Team Rocket group, joins Ash in the gang for a few episodes. At the end of one episode, one of the characters actually attempts to catch the Meowth in a Pokeball. Now, in the world of Pokemon, you can't catch a Pokemon that already belongs to someone else, and this is even established in one of the first episodes of Pokemon Best Wishes. However, longtime Pokemon fans would know that nobody ever caught Meowth. He doesn't actually belong to anybody, he just chooses to work for Team Rocket on his own accord. So someone trying to catch this Meowth is both a surprise to longtime fans, and it makes just as much sense to newer fans alike. It makes sense from a continuity standpoint, but this type of plot point couldn't be done in the past, it can only be done now that we have newer characters and fresher scenarios. But okay, since we're talking about Meowth, let's talk about Team Rocket as a whole. Team Rocket has historically existed to serve as a B-plot to most episodes of the series. Jesse, James, and Meowth, as well as their occasionally goofy Pokemon, were made to act as a comic relief group that allowed the writers to change up the pace of an episode at their leisure. But ever since their debut, they've actually been in every single episode, excluding those recap clip show ones that they aired from time to time. And that means there have been plenty of episodes where Team Rocket was included when they didn't really serve any purpose to the overall plot. Well, with Best Wishes, this was fixed with a simple solution. Team Rocket did not need to appear in every episode, and that's exactly what happened. In fact, they only appeared in episodes where they were relevant to the plot, or they were building up some sort of subplot that would have become relevant in a couple of episodes. And as a result, that means that the generic structure of former Pokemon episodes was now changed up. Rather than having Ash meet a new Pokemon and then encounter Team Rocket, Ash can now do something else without the appearance of Team Rocket. Ash would have to grow on his own, while Team Rocket would grow on their own, so that when they actually confronted each other next time, they could actually have a full-on showdown to see who was stronger. So Ash could have his own plot that focused on his own character and his Pokemon, and Team Rocket could actually have a B-plot that didn't involve Ash getting in the way. These characters could actually have their own stories that would only overlap if the plot deemed it so. And to me, that's much better storytelling than just having the same characters battle over and over again with a Pokemon evolution included here and there. But of course, Team Rocket was also the main topic of controversy when it comes to discussing Pokemon Best Wishes. I just stated that Team Rocket was formerly used for comic relief, but that changed. Instead, they were actually much more serious, and were actually treated as villains. Now they were characterized more in the style of secret agents rather than generic, clueless grunts. And while I admit that Jesse, James, and Meowth had some of the funniest and most iconic lines in the original episodes of the show, seeing them take on a more serious role is really refreshing. Could these have just been other characters? Sure. But seeing Jesse, James, and Meowth become more serious is actually a bit rewarding to people who have watched the show for such a long time. After you see these characters lose for hundreds and hundreds of episodes, it's nice to finally watch an episode where they win, or at the very least, they escape. And this allows for the writers to set up story arcs and build suspense. Now you weren't really sure if Ash was going to win every single time just because he was the hero. While Ash's story would still somewhat continue to be its regular day-to-day narrative, Team Rocket would be setting up some sort of massive story that would finally occur in 15 to 20 episodes from now. Honestly, it was just nice to see that not every episode had to include Team Rocket. If an episode was just supposed to focus on Ash, then it could just focus on Ash. And that made it so that when Team Rocket did finally appear after being absent for a few episodes, their presence was much more impactful. And in terms of a bigger story, while the general scope of the Pokemon anime has always been focused on Ash, we did at least get to mix things up by having him travel with two different characters. This time, Ash was traveling with two brand new characters that debuted in the Pokemon Black and White games, and they were Iris and Silent. And one of them would follow Ash because he wanted to study his battle style, and the other would generally disagree with most of Ash's decisions. Yeah, they're not the best main characters in the Pokemon anime, but I don't think they're that bad either. Yes, they can both get annoying for their own separate reasons, but I do think that they benefited the plot in many different aspects. Namely, because we got two new characters traveling with Ash, we got to see two new characters make Ash think differently. They got to provide their own input on how Ash should battle. And look, I know we all liked the versions of Ash where he was a battle genius and had a strategy for almost everything, but as Ash became a better battler, he became a more boring character. It's nice to see characters battle against each other's wits and not just agree with each other all the time. So people get upset when Ash becomes super smart and then loses because the plot demands it so. But if Ash loses and then grows from it, isn't that much better? When we see Ash lose, that's when we see his true personality. We see him get angry, we see him get sad, and then we see him get quiet as we see him remotivate himself, and then we see him learn. And I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that every time he loses it's justified or every time he wins it's justified. But at least by dumbing him down a little bit, he becomes a much more interesting character. I kinda want to see him get frustrated. I kinda want to see him not always know what to do. Just losing to a tougher opponent is not as interesting. And it's been done over and over again, so it was only a matter of time before the anime mixed this up too. So between this trio of Ash, Iris, and Silent, I think the three characters are okay. Individually, they're a bit forgettable, but together, I think it makes for a nice combination of characters. I think fans just give Iris and Silent a hard time because they're constantly compared to other characters that used to be the main stars of the show. And while I sometimes agree with the genuine criticisms that people have toward these characters, I think that when the three of them bounce off of each other, the show is much more tolerable. Episodes that mainly focused on Iris and Silent, I will admit were a bit boring, but when Iris and Silent had to team up or battle against Ash, I think that made for a much more enjoyable show. But for better or for worse, in my personal opinion for the better, most of Best Wishes focused on Ash. Well, Ash and his Pokemon. Ash's Pokemon have generally had some great personalities, but after the Johto saga, I don't really remember the personalities of many of his Pokemon besides just being cool or being tough. With something as iconic as his Charizard just being a jerk, or his Bulbasaur being a leader, or, I don't know, his Totodile being hyper. Well, Best Wishes delivered on that front. He had a sassy Snivy, a cowardly Tepig, a too big for his britches Scraggy, and an Oshawott that, how do I describe this, just wanted to be adorable and wanted to be the best, but just wasn't. He had a nice cast of Pokemon, and a couple of them had a fair share of time in the spotlight to reflect on their personalities and use them to their advantage or disadvantage. And Pokemon evolutions usually serve as the most apparent visual form for growth of Ash's team. Ash might try out some tactics, and sometimes they'll work, and sometimes they won't work, and sometimes characters will disagree with them, and sometimes he'll be right, and sometimes he'll be wrong, and that's generally just how the show will go. But when the personalities of Ash's Pokemon get involved as well, I just think that makes for some better storytelling. Ash's Pokemon want to prove to him that they can be stronger, or that they can overcome their fears, or that, I don't know, they can evolve to show that they're changing. Ash would use a Pokemon with a type disadvantage, and Iris and Silent would say, you shouldn't do that, and sometimes Ash would be right, and sometimes Ash would be wrong, but when Ash was right, a Pokemon might evolve, and I just think that that's much more amusing than seeing Ash go for the type advantage every time. And I mean, for all the people that hated Iris out there, wasn't it just good to see her be wrong? Wasn't it just good for Ash to show her what's right? In the games, a trainer can only train 6 Pokemon, so typically the show would have Ash catch 5 or so Pokemon from a new region so that in addition to his Pikachu, he'd have a team of 6. And of course, he'd always catch Pokemon that were relevant at the time, Pokemon that were new to a region or would have evolutions that debuted in the current generation. And so, with Pokemon Best Wishes debuting so many new Pokemon, it made fans curious as to which Pokemon Ash would catch, which were the 5 that were going to be part of his new team of 6. But the problem with this format was that, as evidenced in the previous Pokemon series, this just led to Ash relying on the same Pokemon over and over again. Man, I don't need to see his Corphish battle over and over again. I want to see some diversity. Well, Best Wishes changed this up. For the first time since one of the earliest episodes of the series, Ash actually caught a Pokemon after he already had a team of 6. This was an ingenious decision, as this served to explain to new fans of the show what happens when you catch a Pokemon when your party is full, and it allowed for a more diverse set of Pokemon to appear in Ash's team. Once again, it brings back in that idea that things will make sense for new fans and old fans. It allowed the writers to establish the fact that, yeah, you can only carry 6 Pokemon at a time, but it also allowed writers to explain now what happens when you catch more than 6. And considering the fact that this generation featured so many new creatures, it only makes sense that Ash would catch more in this generation and in previous generations. Ash had 10 different Pokemon, most of which had evolved at some point too. People may not generally agree with which Pokemon he caught, but there's no denying that this team is pretty diverse. And to me, this was also fun because this meant that Ash was constantly rotating around his team, rather than just wondering, oh man, is Corphish gonna win this time? Or will he start with Pikachu or Torkoal? The question was now, which Pokemon will Ash bring? Boldore? Oshawott, Palpitoad. It kind of made things fun to see when certain Pokemon would reappear. It kind of reminds me of the original Pokemon series. Ash had quite a few different Pokemon, but he relied on the same couple over and over, so it was a big deal when he'd use some of his less used Pokemon like Muck. In Best Wishes, when Ash walked into a battle, you weren't really sure which Pokemon he'd use. And to me, that's a pretty fun way to, once again, mix things up. But what about episodes where Ash didn't battle anyone? What about the filler? Yeah, when a show as large as Pokemon has to air an episode every single week for years on end, there naturally needs to be a few episodes in between to help pad out the time between major events, or else the show would be over far too quickly. So, yeah, Best Wishes had its fair share of filler episodes. However, the overall portion of the anime still moved at a pretty great pace. By the 6th episode of Pokemon Best Wishes, Ash had already had 2 Pokemon from the Unova region, had won his first gym badge, and had already met all of his new traveling companions. Compared to the 18 episodes it took Ash to win his first gym badge in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. And Ash had won his 8th gym badge in the 84th episode of Pokemon Best Wishes, compared to the 179 episodes it took him in Diamond and Pearl. Now, I do acknowledge that many different episodes took place in each series, but with regards to the so-called filler episodes of Best Wishes, things moved along quickly. We got from major event to major event without having to go through too much filler. But let's go ahead and discuss how things were padded out between major events like gym battles anyway. Throughout the Pokemon anime, many other important plot points may occur between episodes where Ash earns a gym badge. This is where Ash may catch a new Pokemon, or have a Pokemon learn a new move, or even evolve a Pokemon. Or maybe something will happen with one of the side characters of the show. Well, in Best Wishes, the audience had many things to hold them over in between Ash's gym battles. There'd be tournaments thrown into the mix here and there. There would be episode arcs that would last about 4 to 6 episodes where Ash and his friends would battle each other's rivals. So in addition to giving these characters introductory episodes, there'd actually be a few episodes where Ash would battle against his rivals, and then maybe he'd battle against the rivals of Iris and Silent, while Iris and Silent battle against Ash's rivals. Plus, almost every side character that appeared prior to these tournaments would be a competitor within them. So episodes that may have focused on these random background characters were now much more important, as that meant that each character could now be a major focus as an opponent for Ash, Iris, or Silent. And so we got to see all sorts of fun interactions and see each character battle one another. And it was just a fascinating idea overall, because Ash may not have been able to defeat his rival up to this point, because if he did, then any sort of build-up would be completely washed away at this point. But you know who could beat his rival? Silent. Yeah, and to me, that's just so fascinating. It's kind of like a fun rock, paper, scissors concept. Ash can't beat his rival, but Ash can beat Silent. Silent can beat his rival, but Silent can't beat Ash. You know what this reminds me of? Pokemon? Yeah, that's the whole point of the game. And just because you can't defeat one player doesn't mean you can't defeat anybody. And vice versa, just because you can defeat one player doesn't mean you can defeat everybody. So in between major gym battle episodes, we still got to see plenty of fun battles with quirky character matchups. As for the battles themselves, the animation was pretty good, most of the time. The Diamond and Pearl series switched to the widescreen HD format during its airing, and that meant that the animators had some time to practice with the dimensions and adjust their animation styles accordingly. And there were plenty of moments in Best Wishes that utilized a more dynamic animation style in order to better amplify the intensity of a match. And while Diamond and Pearl had its fair share of amazingly animated moments too, the Best Wishes series had a ton of fun cinematic moments. I mean, compare some of these moments to moments from the original series. You can truly see how far the animation quality has come. So, okay, the story is familiar yet somewhat fresh, the animation is well done for the most part, the characters, while maybe not iconic on their own, are fun to see when they interact in unusual circumstances, and the pacing of the overall story is pretty great. So why didn't people enjoy the Best Wishes series again? Well, simply put, the show ran out of steam. And even in the beginning, there were admittedly some signs that demonstrated that the potential that Best Wishes had wouldn't last very long. And look, even early on, people didn't enjoy Best Wishes. That's fine, whether it's because the show changed or whether it's just because you didn't like the writing, that's fine. But there are some things that are objectively unfortunate with the Best Wishes series. Let's start with the ratings. Unfortunately, I had a difficult time finding the actual view count numbers for each episode's Japanese debut. They existed at some point, but any links I found were no longer accessible. The best I could find were some forum threads that discussed each episode's numbers, so for the sake of conversation, I'm gonna go ahead and consider these threads to be a reliable source. Apparently, many of the Best Wishes episodes had low views, many of which even had the lowest amount of views for a Pokemon episode up to that point. Now, I don't really know the exact status of how an animated television show is produced in Japan, but if it's anything like America, a company will generally order a set number of episodes with a specific budget, and based on the viewership of the episodes, a company may order another batch. With Pokemon, Pokemon, things could be different because it's such a titan. But if the mindset is similar at all, I imagine that at the very least, the Pokemon Company ordered at least 50 episodes or so worth of Best Wishes animation. And while they probably ordered another batch of episodes immediately afterward, I imagine that the first 50 or so episodes would determine how the rest of the series would go. Maybe they had an overall game plan and they had a story they wanted to tell, but maybe some things changed when they saw the ratings of the first 50 episodes. If we go by this logic, that being that the Pokemon Company ordered the first 50 episodes in one batch, then that would take us to about the halfway point of the initial phase of Best Wishes. Ash would have had half of his 8 gym badges, he would have had 9 different Pokemon, a few Team Rocket story arcs would have been wrapped up, and a tournament filler arc would have been finished. And you look at these first 50 episodes, and yeah, there's a lot of effort put into them. And while the next few episodes would have a lot of effort put into them too, toward the latter half of the series, that's where you can really start noticing that some corners were cut. That's where you can really start telling that something was changed. Now, I don't particularly know how long it takes to create each episode of Pokemon, but I gotta imagine that the staff at least knows that episodes that contain things like gym battles are the most important, so they probably put the top animators and or devote more time to those episodes. And that shows. Even in the latter half of the series, episodes containing important battles were still well animated, and while people didn't enjoy the results, it still showed that the producers knew that these episodes were important. But there are just so many other episodes where you can see that so many corners were cut. Just having characters talk instead of doing basic animations. Just having characters reuse animations over and over again so you didn't have to animate new stuff. Just having Ash only use Pikachu so that you didn't have to animate any of his other Pokemon. It's stuff like that that people like me start to notice. Most infamously, an arc known as Team Rocket vs. Team Plasma was scheduled to air in Japan back in March 2011. However, an earthquake struck the country just before the episodes were to be aired, and since the episodes of this arc contained some levels of violence, including the destruction of a city, the Team Rocket vs. Team Plasma arc was never aired publicly. And honestly, had these episodes been broadcasted, I think they might have had the chance to change everything. The first dozen or so episodes of Best Wishes set up this arc so hard, it's like this was the main focus. I truly believe that with the amount of emphasis they put on this arc, that the ratings would have been decent enough, and that people would have looked at these episodes and said, you know, Best Wishes was actually pretty cool. But as it stands, these episodes didn't air, and they'll never air. The plot was changed so that any major events that happened in these episodes were retconned, and it's almost like the Pokemon Company wants to forget these episodes ever existed. And what kind of screwed them up was, since the Pokemon Company still wanted to air an episode during the week of the earthquake anyway, rather than just not air anything, they just aired the following episode. In other words, whatever events would have happened in this episode were either slightly spoiled or were null and void. The whole arc was pointless. All the buildup, all the animation that actually went into these episodes, all of the storytelling that would have happened afterward, all gone. And it's a real shame. It really is. I'm sure that the Pokemon team was really excited to actually air these episodes because it really shows what they wanted to do. But okay, let's go back to the logic that I had earlier. I stated that the Pokemon Company probably ordered 50 episodes of animation, including this whole Team Rocket versus Team Plasma arc. So as the first 50 episodes of the show aired, combined with the removal of Team Rocket versus Team Plasma, I imagine that the producers of the show requested a change in direction for the next batch of 50 episodes. Now that this Team Rocket versus Team Plasma stuff wasn't gonna matter, they scrapped everything, and they had a whole change in direction for the second half of the show. Some things would still be required, such as Ash needing to obtain his remaining 4 gym badges and having a certain Pokemon evolve, but many other components were changed. And you know what? You can actually kind of tell where some things were changed. This is perhaps most evident when Ash receives his 7th gym badge. In this episode, Ash gets his badge and claims that he'll head to Opaloosid City. Now, throughout the show, Iris has made it clear that she's afraid of encountering a certain trainer again. And that trainer is the gym leader of the Opaloosid City gym. So when Ash says he wants to go to Opaloosid City, Iris becomes a little nervous, and rightfully so. So it seems clear to me that at some point in time, Ash was supposed to go to Opaloosid City. But that changed, because in the following episode, at the very beginning, Ash is told, oh, the Opaloosid City gym is closed. So I imagine that this story element is a remnant of just what was supposed to be. This episode was important, it featured a gym battle, it was a stepping stone for Ash's journey. This episode's production probably continued as planned because the animators needed more time to work on it. Like I said, these gym battle episodes are probably given a lot of focus. So this script, this plot, this episode was probably left untouched, but all the episodes surrounding it were probably modified after the Pokemon Company saw the ratings for the first 50 episodes. Now, if Opaloosid City was never brought up in the first place, I'd have believed that maybe the rest of the show was written pretty early on. Maybe Ash never intended to go to Opaloosid City for his 8th gym badge. But the fact that the topic was brought up and then immediately disregarded in the following episode is a little suspicious, don't you think? But I gotta admit, they did come up with a pretty clever substitute. He instead fought Roxy, a poison-type gym leader that was not in Pokemon Black and White. And even more so, Ash got to use 6 Pokemon, while Roxy only used 3, which is the first time that a 3-on-6 battle had ever occurred in the series. And again, this is another one of those episodes where the animation is still pretty solid. It's a gym battle episode, so naturally there'd be more effort put into it, but I have to ask, how long was this episode planned? Maybe I'm completely wrong and Ash was always planned to go against this gym leader for his 8th badge, but I just really don't know. The team put this episode, or this 2-part episode, together and it looks great. Or maybe Ash would have gone to Opelucid City and this battle was planned anyway and then they just changed it into Ash getting his 8th badge. It's a bit more difficult for me to defend the second half of Best Wishes, but there are still a couple things that I enjoyed. But again, it just bums me out. What happened to the whole point of changing the series up? And that's not even getting into the fact that Team Rocket just suddenly becomes comedic again too, or that Ash randomly brings back Charizard and uses him once. So what happened to this whole point of changing the series up? That's the stuff I liked, that's the stuff that I could defend Best Wishes for. But everyone complained about Best Wishes, and then the company tried to change everything back by making Team Rocket comedic again and by having Ash reunite with old characters and even old Pokemon. This show clearly had a plan. It clearly wanted to have these big story arcs. It clearly had other episodes that were finished and that were completely scrapped. Whether it was due to an earthquake or due to poor ratings or a combination of both with some other element thrown in between, Pokemon Best Wishes was not so bad, but yeah, it could have been a lot better. And it probably was supposed to be a lot better. I know it's a lame defense to say that this could have been worse, but given what they had to go through, we know that it could have been a lot worse. Maybe there were some people that were never gonna give Best Wishes a chance, but rather than just looking back at it and saying, oh man, this is different, it sucks, let's take away some of the more positive things. And I'm sure that there were plenty of things that I didn't mention, and there are plenty of things that I can't defend. But I enjoyed Best Wishes, and I'm glad that it existed. Even if people didn't enjoy the show for the reasons that I mentioned here, I still hope that people can look back at Pokemon Best Wishes and see that maybe it wasn't so bad after all. Maybe everything's not so black and white.